guidance. I just need to get my Instagram going here. And we've got good stuff for today. So I hope you're ready to go along for the ride. It is a rainy Wednesday here. I don't think it's going to last, but there we go. Finally got Instagram to connect up. Good morning. Happy early morning intuitive guidance to you all. Let's see who all pops on today. Let's see, what's new for today? I'm doing a podcast with a friend of mine in Green Bay. Good morning, Joe Neal. Glad you are here. And if someone had told me 20 years ago that I'd be doing a podcast about spirituality, I would have gone, really? Good morning, Gwen. Glad you are here. Welcome. But she was looking for someone to talk about spirituality in a non-confined way. So I guess I'm her gal. So I'll be heading for Green Bay a little later. And my beloved coffee group, we're doing our next round of Sophia today, which is Divine Feminine. And it's on, this one is Mary Magdalene. So I'm looking forward to that attunement. But today we get to talk about David Lee Roth. How much fun will that be? Good morning, Abigail. Glad you are here. Welcome, welcome. So I found a part in the book where we're going to talk about the 4 villains of decision making, how we all get messed up. And these guys' system, very simple 4-step system for addressing that mess up and countering our natural tendencies to mess ourselves up. And then I'll share the David Lee Roth story. So that's our agenda for today. But let's start, as always, with some breath. Nice deep breath in. Let it go. Breathing in. Let it go. Taking in life fully. Releasing what no longer serves. Grounding through your feet, coming into the present moment. Breathe in. And breathe out. And here we are. Here we are. So, Decisive. Chip and Dan Heath. And I think it's funny they do Chip Heath and Dan Heath because you don't want to make it look like you're married when you're brothers, I guess. Whatever. Good morning, Nancy. So what I hope is you all find something highly useful in this information. Either highly useful or highly provocative. It makes you think about, oh yeah, that would explain that cruddy decision I made a while ago, why I went where I went with it. So we'll start with that. It's the let me leave the tag in there just in case I decide to reference back. It's the 4 villains of decision making, how we mess ourselves up. So the first one is narrow framing. Unduly limiting the options we consider. So that would be, well, do I stay in my job or do I leave? Only 2 options in that mindset, right? Not, do I stay in this job as it is? Do I ask my boss to offload some of my tasks? Do I ask my boss if I can take on some of her or his tasks? Do I move to a different department within the company? Do I move to another company? Do I retire? Many, many, many options that we kind of automatically don't allow ourselves to see. It's either this or that. And we've really been trained to think that way, this or that, instead of this or this or this or this and that and that. We unnecessarily limit ourselves. So obviously, to address that one, we need to be able to look at a plethora of options. So there's your first villain, narrow framing. Second one is confirmation bias. We seek out information that bolsters our beliefs. So if I believe something, I go around and I find people who are like thinkers. And good morning, Diane. And I say to them, well, blah, blah, blah. Don't you agree? Even the way I ask the question implies what the right answer is. Truly creative, truly brilliant problem solvers, decision makers, seek out those who have different opinions, maybe even vehemently different opinions, and take their counsel ask for their feedback. Okay? So the second one is the confirmation bias. We look for the answers we want. Villain number 3, short-term emotion, being swayed by emotions that will fade. Let me tell you the classic one that I have seen a gazillion times as a coach and a psychotherapist. People in the middle of a divorce, and one of them is like, give them whatever they want, just make this go away, basically. And I always try to get them to come at it from a different perspective. Let's look for an equitable division here. Let's look for an amicable way to part ways. This has come to the end of its lifespan. Let's bless it and lay it to rest. But don't just throw in the towel, because I will guarantee you 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you're going to regret that you did it that way. So that short-term emotion of, I can't stand this, I just want this over with, it's so painful, we go with that, and we shoot ourselves in the foot, basically, by doing so. Number 4, overconfidence. Overconfidence. And some of you may be thinking, heck, I'm not confident in my decisions at all. There are people, CEOs of companies, who tend to be very overconfident in their decisions, having too much faith in their own prediction ability. So time after time after time, and again, these are the kind of people that, if they're smart, if they're not stuck in ego, will ask people who disagree with them to have the conversation. Tell me why you disagree. Tell me what about my thinking you think is messed up, blah, blah, blah. It takes a thick skin to be able to do that, but it's so valuable in moving things forward. So those are the 4 villains. So what process did these guys come up with to address the villains? They call it the WRAP process, WRAP. So to address the narrow framing, you widen your options. How can you expand your set of choices? And they had some amazing ways that they did this. One of them was in an ad campaign, they hired 6 different ad companies to address the first step of the process. And you might say, well, what a waste of money. In the long run, it wasn't, because they got many more ideas than they would have had they not solicited feedback from all 6. Then they could narrow down to the one that they liked and move forward with that, to the one that suited their needs the best. So widen your options. That's what brainstorming is meant to do. And that's why in the brainstorming process, you don't evaluate the options. You just write everything down. If Superman's going to fly in and save the day, put it on the board. Put it on the board. Everything makes it onto the board. The evaluation step comes later. This is just generate everything that comes to your mind, okay? Because even if something wild, like Superman flies in to save the day, makes it onto the board, that thought might trigger someone as, well, Joe, he's kind of our Superman. Let's ask Joe. Kind of see the point? Number 2, confirmation bias. Remember, we ask people who are going to agree with us. Instead, you are reality test your assumptions. How can you get outside your head and collect information that you trust? And in that regard, they look in a variety of different places. So they don't just look in their own field. Let's say it's an ad agency. They don't just look at other ads. Yes, Nancy X, absolutely. Diversify, diversify, diversify. There's already been, I'm on page 22 here. I'm further along in the book than that, but there've already been a plethora of options for a specific decision that came from fields that are greatly afield from the field in which the question came up. So it might be, we're doing an ad campaign, but we're going to talk to a hairdresser, or we're going to talk to a boilermaker, or we're going to talk to a skyscraper window cleaner, whatever it is. Pulling from diverse groups of people that may have relevant information. 3, the short-term emotion tempts you to make the wrong choice. Their A in their wrap is attain distance before deciding. How can you overcome short-term emotion and conflicted feelings to make the best choice? And they share many stories about that, but one of which is losing, making a bad choice. Losing is far more painful to us than making a good choice is pleasurable to us. That is interesting because it's going to lead us to make decisions that aren't balanced. So how do you attain distance? It can be anything like, well, if my best friend was in this circumstance, what would I advise him or her to do? Or if this is 10 years from now and I'm looking back on this decision, what would I hope I see myself doing? Get yourself some distance from it. And the last one, the overconfident. I mean, the step 4 is you're going to live with whatever decision you've made, but sometimes you're going to end up being that overconfident person about how the future will unfold. So their P in the wrap is prepare to be wrong. Prepare to be wrong. And intellectually, we know that we learn more when we make a mistake than we do when we make a good choice. We learn far more when we make a mistake. Are we willing to make those mistakes? Not always. We have been trained to loathe mistakes. They are our best teacher. How do we incorporate that into the process? So, as promised, I told you that I would share the story. Let me find it here. The David Lee Roth story. And so what I want you to see here is that how something appears on the surface may not at all be what's going on. So, the last paragraph before we get into the story is a more subtle way the wrap process can help us is by ensuring that we're aware of the need to make the decision. And that leads us to David Lee Roth. Roth was the lead singer for Van Halen from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, an era when the band cranked out one smash hit after another. Running with the Devil, Dance the Night Away, Jump, Hot for Teacher, and more. Van Halen toured tirelessly with over 100 concerts in 1984 alone. And behind the band's headbanging appeal was some serious operational expertise. It was one of the first rock bands to bring major stage productions to smaller markets. As Roth recalled in his autobiography, we'd pull up with 9 18-wheeler trucks full of gear where the standard was 3 trucks, max. So they've got a whole elaborate setup going on here. The band's production design was astonishingly complex. The contract specifying the setup was, according to Roth, like a version of the Chinese Yellow Pages. Because it was so technical and complex, it was like reading a foreign language. A typical article in the contract might say there will be a 15 amperage voltage sockets at 24-foot spaces, evenly providing 19 amperes, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so who's ever reading this and setting it up has to be very knowledgeable and has to be very detail oriented, right? While Van Halen had its own road crew, much of the prep work had to be done in advance, before the 18-wheelers arrived. Van Halen and its crew lived in fear that the venue's stagehands would screw something up and leave the band exposed to injury. Here's the why. This was the same era when Michael Jackson's head was set on fire by some misfiring stage pyrotechnics as he filmed a Pepsi commercial. We just went and saw the Michael movie, and that scene was horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And he was in chronic pain ever after. But given the band's frantic touring schedule, there wasn't time to do a top-to-bottom quality check at each venue. How could the band know when they were at risk? There's the question. During this same period of touring, rumors circulated wildly about Van Halen's backstage antics. The band members were notorious partiers, and while there's nothing particularly noteworthy about a band that liked to party, Van Halen seemed committed to a level of decadence that was almost artistic. Roth wrote in his biography, "Well, we've heard about throwing a television out a window. How about getting enough extension cords so that the television can remain plugged in all the way down to the ground floor?" Sometimes, though, the band's actions seemed less playfully mayhem and more like egomania. The most egregious rumor about the band was that its contract writer demanded a bowl of M&Ms backstage with all the brown ones removed. How many of you heard this story? Yep. There were tales of Roth walking backstage, spotting a single brown M&M and freaking out, trashing the dressing room. This rumor was true. The brown-free bowl of M&Ms became the perfect, appalling symbol of rock star diva behavior. I remember hearing that and thinking, what a jerk. Here was a band making absurd demands simply because it could. Get ready to reverse your perception. The band's M&M clause was written into its contract to serve a very specific purpose. It was called Article 126, and it read as follows: "There will be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area upon pain of forfeiture of the show with full compensation." The article was buried in the middle of countless technical specifications. When Roth arrived at a new venue, he'd immediately walk backstage and glance at the M&M bowl. If he saw a brown M&M, he'd demand a line check of the entire production. "Guaranteed you're going to arrive at a technical error," he said. They didn't read the contract. Sometimes it would threaten to just destroy the whole show. In other words, David Lee Roth was no diva. He was an operations master. He needed a way to assess quickly whether the stagehands at each venue were paying attention, whether they'd read every word of the contract and taken it seriously. He needed a way, in other words, to snap out of mental autopilot and realize that a decision had to be made. In Van Halen's world, a brown M&M was a tripwire. So in other words, that was a way he could quickly assess all of the technology to make sure that they weren't going to get electrocuted or something's going to fall on them or blow up and burn their hair off. They were a big hair band. Don't be burning off the hair, right? So hopefully what that does is lay some groundwork for decision making. Let's talk about decision making. It is this amazing process we go through or we avoid, and we have these inherent, built-in ways that we screw ourselves up. These guys are offering us a method to counter those inherent methods we have for screwing up. We get very narrow. Here's a way to broaden, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that piqued your curiosity about, oh, I wonder what else they're going to tell us. And I may continue with the book, or I may throw in some card decks here and there. We'll see how spirit leads us. But I just thought that was very interesting stuff. So on this fine Wednesday, what will you do with this information? How can this serve you? If nothing else, share the story with somebody because it's kind of fun, right? I will see you again tomorrow. Remember, you are capable of far more than you think you are. Have an awesome day.